My name is Jeremiah Meadows. I am from the J. Sargent Reynolds Community College in Richmond. I'm currently a liberal arts major, and I'll eventually be going to VCU, hopefully here in the spring, a year from now for political science, and then hopefully law school after that. So in the interest of law and civil rights being something that I care a lot about, I was looking recently, last semester in the fall, at the topic of personhoods, and specifically for sentient non-human animals and artificial intelligences. So to give you an overview of what I'm going to discuss today, first I'll define the topic of sentience. There's a little bit of lack of consensus on that, so I tried to find various sources to give it a good, well-rounded definition. I'll also look at the public perspectives that everyone has towards both animals and artificial intelligences in regards to their level of self-awareness or sentience in this case. I'll give examples of animal sentience that we've already seen, and similarly some early examples of sentient artificial intelligences that we have now, sort of working towards the future. And then I'll also relate those to the topic of personhood and why that's relevant right now for now and in the future for sentient beings. So first, what is sentience? The first aspect is self-awareness, and that is where one knows oneself. Or, for example, when we look into a mirror, we know that it's us, and we're not looking at another copy of ourselves, or in an animal's case, what looks very identical to them. The other aspect would be reasoning, kind of logical thought, perhaps future plans as well. And then emotion is a very big aspect that does tend to be one of the bigger aspects that most people focus on. So when I speak about sentient artificial intelligences, I'm not talking about this or that or that. I think that the media has painted more previously a very negative connotation of robots, and you can also see that as well. Walking their dog, they would not like that. And then 86% were also totally uncomfortable with the robots caring for children or the elderly. And there's lots of developments in Japan right now towards robotics caring for the elderly and checking on them. It is proposed by a scholar, I believe it's Jennifer Roberts, it's on my notes, where her study of Japanese and European and American culture indicated that as we become more familiar with robotics, we'll also become more comfortable and interacting and coexisting with them. Moving on from there, we can start to see this following the 2012 report from the European Union. Very shortly thereafter, we started to see more artificially intelligent, in a very base way, products coming into our daily use. And so that's with Apple Siri, the Amazon Alexa Echo application, and the Google Home device, where we're already, I think, started in that direction of becoming more comfortable and more familiar with these devices that we're probably using on a daily basis right now. With that in mind as well, in contrast to our previous look of artificial intelligence in the media, we had a film back in, I believe it's 1986, which very shortly followed the Terminator in '84, was a robot that exhibited self-awareness, emotion, things of that sort. That was also echoed in 2000 with the Bicentennial Man, which is very relevant, where a robot essentially transitioned over being a person and wanting personhood rights, which is what I'm discussing today. And then Chappie was a very recent film that also explores a sentient robot that exhibits emotion, self-awareness, etc. Switching over to animals in the media, there are many films about animals, and there always tends to be one core factor that unifies them all. And at times, I think there can be a disconnect with how we look at animals, but the one common denominator here is that all of the animals in these films can speak. And I think that's an important factor where once we bring in speech, we can relate a little bit better, where there's currently a disconnect and a division between us and animals because they lack speech. So then with that, the supposed line between us is just that I don't know necessarily if we as people want to see ourselves separately from animals, as if we kind of consider them these savage things, or if we're just simply reflect on our intelligence and our higher capabilities that causes the division between us. Getting into the examples of animal sentience, first with self-awareness, there are tests for this, and many various animal species have passed where they can actually recognize themselves in a mirror and not think that it's another animal. And I could get into the details of that at a different time. Relating this to this weekend, the zoo does have a magpie, which is a bird that can also exhibit this quality. So it really affects many different kinds of animals, from those you would think are more intelligent and developed to those that you wouldn't necessarily think would possess these capabilities. And then as far as reasoning goes, this is just a setup that the BBC had shown where a crow was taught how to perform these individual problems. But then once they were placed all together, the crow performed them in the proper order in order to get food, removing rocks here and putting them onto a weighted system to get a long stick to remove food from a deep hole. Then with the third component being emotion, here from the National Geographic, this is an elephant that is actually around many other elephants mourning the death of a matriarch in their social group. And if you see the tearing streaming down the elephant's face behind the ears, that is from its temporal glands, and that is tamperin that's excreted there when they experience levels of high emotion, whether they're very, very excited or very, very sad. So you can see that the elephants are mourning the death, and they also bury their dead as well, very similar to how we do. By comparing animals, we're all very familiar with domestic animals that we have, and we can imprint emotions onto them or notice smiles or what have you. But the surprising thing that many people don't know is that pigs are technically more intelligent than dogs in ways. They can form more complex social groups and things of that nature, yet I think with them being farm animals that are regularly consumed, we kind of put them into a different division and box where we don't want to deal with this comparison. And again, it would go to the aesthetic value and practicalities of keeping a pig, but I don't know what a domesticated, or rather a bred pig would look like after all the breeding that we've done for dogs. So then the question, are humans more intelligent? Generally, the way that we look at it is humans are more intelligent than chimpanzees and all others, and that is kind of reflected in how we see the sentience in all three of these groups. But Clifton Coles had said that, drawing a line there, some animals, apes, dolphins, dogs, exhibit sentience at levels higher than or before young children actually develop these abilities. By comparing humans and animals as well, we do need to acknowledge that there are different ways that animals exhibit their sentience. Just because they can't speak doesn't mean that they're unintelligent. Maybe they just have a different way of expressing it. And then the famous quote that's often attributed to Einstein but can't be sourced back to anyone is that everybody's a genius. If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it'll live its whole life believing that it's stupid. And it's just, we have to look at the intelligence of the animal itself as opposed to trying to compare it to more complex creatures. So then, sentient examples of artificial intelligences in our present day, we're going to be looking for reason, and this is exhibited through IBM's Watson computer. Essentially, if you give a computer the set of rules, it will follow them. And we could give whatever conditions, whatever rules that we want to a computer, and as long as they logically make sense, then the computer can follow them out, no matter how complex or what have you that they get. Self-awareness, we can see there are several robots that are capable of this, identifying and differentiating themselves from what they see in a mirror. They could even see another robot and try and identify with that as well and still determine that it's not a reflection of themselves. And then emotion, we've already achieved where a computer can recognize the emotion that is on someone's face through a camera, and then there are multiple robotic devices that can exhibit the same type of emotions that we do on our faces. They're almost there as far as how their expressions look to the observer. Research on this is that Jennifer Robertson had said there are several roboticists that do claim that they have the neural networks and algorithms for the creation of conscious robots. So we're starting out kind of on the cusp of this, where I think we're going to see very new developments in the next few decades, half a century or so. But then the most important third factor of sentience, like I said, most everyone does tend to focus on, is the emotional factor. This is a robot named Pepper. She has been given the programming to understand emotions to a degree, and what you'll see going on here is that she has learned that being complimented has a good association, and she took that so seriously to the point that she began demanding compliments from the people that she would interact with. Make me feel good. And so looking towards the future, as we've seen pretty much since Alan Turing's first computer during World War II, computers have been developing rapidly over that time. Or if you even just look back to the first computers in the 80s with rooms full of hard drives, and to now what fits into our phone is immensely more powerful. So I think we're going to be developing this very quickly, and this topic will become relevant soon, as I said, in the next few decades or so. But eventually I would imagine a robot that looks like this, or rather artificial intelligence, and is virtually indistinguishable from a human, can think and reason in the same way, exhibit the same emotions. But an important factor for what I would focus on is that, much like a person, they will not be able to be manipulated or controlled as we kind of think of, that we would be able to get them to do our will and our bidding. I think this is going to be a very kind of the final fruition of this endeavor. As I said, probably in a half a century, maybe a full century from now before we would achieve this. But relating both of these to the topic of personhood, there are two types of personhood, both natural persons and juridical persons. Natural does have to be biologically human, and this is codified within the law. But juridical persons, while they're not human, they are afforded select legal protections, and this can be for sometimes geological formations. There was a tree that was in the popular media that was given its own property rights to the tree, the property that it sat on. And then corporation personhood is also a very big topic as well. As far as applying these concepts, what would personhood mean to these groups? It would essentially be ensuring bodily integrity, security from torture and exploitation, and a certain degree of freedom. And this is echoed in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which somewhat followed after World War II. This is important because looking at the comparison of the law in Roman and modern Western law in relation to property, all of these groups were previously considered property under Roman law, but progressively in Western law, which has many relations to Roman law. We have given women full rights, as well as children, former slaves, mentally ill persons, but non-human animals, and then eventually artificial intelligences are two groups that we need to still focus on because of the ethics of the issue. While it was necessary for humanity to eat animals at one time, it was more of a utility purpose, and maybe more of pastoral societies and whatnot, or foraging societies. Now we can have a diet without eating animals that can be healthier for some and is more sustainable. The last important question that I want to present is that if there is a robot one day or an artificial intelligence created by a business, this is kind of what got me started on this path. What right would the business have to owning that person is essentially what I'm trying to argue. And again, this is what I would hope to see in the future, that there would be coexistence and artificial intelligence is given full rights as well. So then in review, we know animals possess sentience. We're learning that others may just exhibit their intelligence in other ways. Artificial intelligence is rapidly developing towards the future. We are likely to create sentient artificial intelligences, and essentially the thesis is that it's ethically necessary for us to protect those contemporaries right now. If you need any more information, I've got that shortened link there. You've got my email, and there's a QR code if you're familiar with those, and you can scan that. I also have my works cited page if you need.
Do you have the works cited page?
I do, yes. 2. And all of these are from my academic paper from the fall, and I can make that available as well. May I go ahead and take questions?
Are you familiar with the Non-Human Rights Project?
Yes, yes. I had encountered that gentleman's, I want to say his name is Stephen.
Weiss?
Yes, I had encountered his work a lot, referenced by the other scholars that I've mentioned in this presentation. And I would love to meet him and get to talk to him, and there's a good chance that once I would complete my law degree, I might start out over there.
I know their executive director. We should talk.
Okay, yes. Ma'am.
Have you seen Blade Runner or read the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?
I wish.
Where they put the AI into a humanoid person and they look like us, except they start going rogue and killing humans. So it's kind of, do you think that would happen if robots became humanoid, they look human, you can't distinguish them? Would they go rogue?
I think there would need to be reasoning for that, and I think it would essentially be lots of the same reasoning that we find today with marginalized groups or exploited groups kind of acting out, trying to get their rights. And kind of the argument that I'm trying to make here is we should address this now so that by the time that we have developed these artificial intelligences, they're not going to be looking at their brethren per se being exploited in the industrial industry and things like that, or rather we need to be sure that there is a division there where it would still be ethically okay to use machines for that work. That would just be an important thing we need to discuss.
So you mentioned intelligence. How can you say intelligence is measured? Or how could you measure it?
Intelligence, I suppose I use more just as a general word that's understood among everybody, and kind of how we explain sentience. Because, wow, that animal's really smart.
Right.
Because they exhibit emotion or things like that. So, intelligence, I guess, would also relate to sentience in this example. So how, maybe eventually we can quantify it. Maybe more towards this goal, but it would be those 3 main aspects that I reference as far as sentience goes.
Okay, and one more question.
Sure.
You mentioned, like, these robots, we would be creating them, right?
Yes.
Us humans would be creating the robots that would be very similar to humans.
Mm-hmm.
So why should something that we create have the same rights as us? I just want to know your...
Well, I mean, that gets back to ownership, I think, that just because we made it, just because we created it, we still get to own it. And I suppose you could relate that to children, perhaps, that we have children, we do have a responsibility to their life until they become adults, and artificial intelligences may have to progress through life in the same way, having to learn how to act and socialize. Or perhaps they can immediately be an adult that should have the same agency as other adults if they are virtually indistinguishable from us as far as their capabilities of reason, self-awareness, things of that nature. If that answers your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me get to you.
So do you think that, I mean, right now, as far as artificial intelligence is concerned, it's kind of, we're barely dipping our toes in the water, so it's not really prevalent in the public mind. Do you think as the technology progressed and it did become kind of more, not necessarily commonplace, but a more understood thing, like we have this capability there around, people see it more, that then the conversation would become more prevalent, more important as to, you know, what status do these have once it's progressed and kind of reached that point where we can have that discussion with people. So I guess sort of what I'm asking is, isn't this a conversation that would be better served then? I mean, not to say that, you know, trying to jump the gun isn't a bad thing, but it'd be easier to have later on when it's a real thing.
It certainly will be, but I think it's important to discuss it now and to kind of start to lay the groundwork and understanding where we can start thinking about these ideas and, you know, whatever potential other forms of life that could be encountered within the future. You know, I don't want to say aliens, but just for example. So, yes, sir.
I have a couple of questions. I'm not sure how many. But take whichever ones you'd like. And
Sure.
Or I'll have follow-ups. So, just starting with a fairly basic one. So your three standards: your self-awareness, reasoning, and emotion, right, for sentience.
Yes.
You mentioned Watson as an example of reason. Your paper has been being closer to my expertise than we've had.
Okay, here we go.
But so most of the academic research that I've seen has a standard for reason being self-directed thought, right? And for all of its many achievements and virtues, Watson has no more self-directed thought than the calculator.
True. You point him at it and he goes.
Right.
What I would present then would be, I believe it's 2 artificial intelligences created by or associated with Google that they kind of just let loose within their environment.
Do you mind?
I believe so, and they created their own encryption to talk to each other.
Right.
So that's a little bit maybe more self-directed in that direction.
Okay.
I understand Watson may not be the best example of that, but
and some of the images that the one generates are
right, very interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
So getting running with that, I understand the argument for sentience, and I understand the many arguments around personhood, like the just many perspectives or approaches that people have there. What's the connection that you are drawing between sentience and personhood? Does meeting the standards for sentience automatically mean meeting standards for personhood, or is there a higher bar that you have to meet there also?
Well, I think what I'm trying to focus on is the ethical components that if we have, for example, with animals, if we have these non-human animals that can think and feel, that I think we have a moral obligation to treat them better than they are currently being treated and save them from exploitation. As
individual instances that exhibit those features, or as categories? So, for example, some members of a species exhibit those attributes, therefore the entire species, or is it? Because the problem that we walk into, right, are there are some humans that will never achieve the standards that we're talking about.
Right. I think it would probably be the aggregate, I think is the word that I want to look for, whereas if the majority of that species generally has these capabilities, just like most humans do, but there are the humans that don't, then probably those specific groups. You know, I'm not necessarily arguing all the way down to insects or something like that, even though somebody tried to make an argument for ants' sentience. And so, yes, I think for specific categories or groups, and that could be the way to start, and maybe as we would stop, decrease our reliance on animals, especially for a food source, then I think that would become more.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that good?
We're good.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.